Most of us are familiar with the story of the Mary Celeste, arguably the most famous ghost ship of all time and my own personal favourite strange but true story. She was found adrift in the Atlantic Ocean not far from the Azores Islands, Portugal on December 5, 1872. Her captain, his wife, their baby daughter and the crew of 7 people were not on board upon its discovery and never seen or heard from again. What makes this story a little stranger is that none of the cargo or most of their personal belongings were missing. The brigantine class vessel Mary Celeste was manufactured and built in the later part of 1860 at the Joshua Dewis shipyard in the village of Spencer's Island on the shores of the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia, Canada. She was constructed out of the locally felled timber with her hull planks facing flush rather than overlapping. Originally she was registered under British ownership with the name Amazon, which later became the Mary Celeste when she transferred to American ownership in 1868. Her maiden voyage in June 1861, Amazon set sail to 5 islands to take on board a cargo of timber for passage across the Atlantic to London. After supervising the ship's loading, the ship's first captain, Robert McClellan, fell ill. His condition worsened, and Amazon returned to Spencer's Island where McClellan died on June 19th. John Nutting Parker took over as captain and resumed the voyage to London, in the course of which Amazon encountered further incidents. She collided with fishing equipment in the Narrows off Eastport, Maine, and after leaving London ran into and sank a brig in the English Channel. Parker remained in command for 2 years, during which Amazon worked mainly in the West Indies trade. She crossed the Atlantic to France in November 1861 and in Marseille was the subject of a painting, possibly by Honoré de Pellegrin, a well-known maritime artist of the Marseille School. In 1863, Parker was succeeded by William Thompson, who remained in command until 1867. These were quiet times for the vessel. Amazon's mate later recalled that we went to the West Indies, England and the Mediterranean, what we call the foreign trade. Not a thing unusual happened. In October 1867, at Cape Breton Island, Amazon was driven ashore in a storm and was so badly damaged that her owners abandoned her as a wreck. On October 15th, she was acquired as a derelict by Alexander McBean of Glace Bay, Nova Scotia. Her final captain was a man by the name of Benjamin Spooner Briggs, who took command of her under her new name, Mary Celeste. He took his wife Sarah and their baby daughter Sophia along with their crew on the fateful voyage, which would end in mysterious circumstances. On October 20th, 1872, Briggs arrived at Pier 50 on the East River, New York City, to supervise the loading of the ship's cargo for Genoa, 1,701 barrels of poisonous denatured alcohol. A week later, Briggs was joined by his wife and daughter. On Sunday, November 3rd, Briggs wrote to his mother telling her that he intended to leave on Tuesday, adding that, "Our vessel is in beautiful trim and I hope we shall have a fine passage." On Tuesday morning, November 5th, Mary Celeste left Pier 50 and moved into New York Harbour. The weather was uncertain and Briggs decided to wait for better conditions. He anchored the ship just off Staten Island, where Sarah used the delay to send a final letter to her mother-in-law, in which she wrote, "Tell Arthur I make great dependence on the letters I shall get from him, and I will try to remember anything that happens on the voyage which he would be pleased to hear." On November 7th, when the weather improved, Mary Celeste left the harbour and went out into the Atlantic. The Canadian brigantine vessel named Dei Gratia found the abandoned Mary Celeste on December 5th, 1872 sea time. The crew of the Dei Gratia spotted her some 6 miles away and noticed her erratic and unsteady movements. Instinctively they knew something was wrong. The sails, partly set, were in a poor condition, some missing altogether, and much of the rigging was damaged, with ropes hanging loosely over the sides. The main hatch cover was secure, but the fore and lazarette hatches were open, their covers beside them on the deck. The ship's single lifeboat was missing, a small yawl that had apparently been stowed across the main hatch, while the binnacle housing the ship's compass had shifted from its place. Its glass cover had been broken. There was about 3.5 feet or 1.1 metres of water in the hold, a significant but not alarming amount of water for a ship of this size. A makeshift sounding rod, a device for measuring the amount of water in the hold, was found abandoned on the deck. The cargo was intact and some personal belongings were scattered about the ship. However, the captain's navigational equipment was missing. The evidence pointed to an orderly abandonment of the vessel onto the lifeboat. The Mary Celeste was taken to Gibraltar, where court hearings proceeded on December 17, 1872 for her salvage. Many theories, speculations and conspiracies have been put forward as explanations for what occurred on board. Some suggest a mutiny, but that does not explain why everyone abandoned the vessel in a seemingly orderly fashion. There is one scientific and logical explanation for what happened, and it's one which I am inclined to believe, as it is quite plausible and comes from the crew of the Dei Gratia. Commentators generally agree that to precipitate such a course of action as abandonment of an apparently sound and seaworthy ship with ample provisions, some extraordinary and alarming circumstance must have arisen. In his evidence to the inquiry, first mate of the Dei Gratia, Oliver Duval, ventured an explanation based on the sounding rod found on the Mary Celeste deck. He suggested that Briggs abandoned ship after a sounding which, because of a malfunction of the pumps or other mishap, had given a false impression that the vessel was taking on water rapidly. A severe waterspout strike before the abandonment could explain the amount of water in the ship and the ragged state of her rigging and sails. The low barometric pressure generated by the spout could have driven water from the bilges up into the pumps, leading the crew to assume the ship had taken on more water than she had and was in danger of sinking. But what of the crew? If they abandoned ship, then where did they end up? No one saw or heard from them again, so we can only surmise that they most likely perished at sea trying to find land. So, what do you think happened to the Mary Celeste? Did the crew mutiny against the captain and out of madness kill him and his family, then abandon ship? Or did a waterspout cause them to believe the ship was sinking when it wasn't, and then attempt to reach land with a lifeboat but perish trying to do so? No one will really know what happened, as the crew were never seen or heard from again, which perpetuates the mystery and the legend of the most famous ghost ship of them all. I'll see you in 2 weeks for another Strangeries episode. Thanks for watching.